Hello and welcome to the second in SWET series of talks on artificial intelligence this fall. I'm Daniel Morales. I'm here in my capacity as a writer and translator, and most of all, as a SWET member. I'll be serving as the moderator. I'll go over our agenda and give a brief introduction before we start. First, let me introduce SWET. The Society of Writers, Editors, and Translators is a cross-professional community of Japan-related wordsmiths. Our members include writers, editors, translators, copywriters, copy editors, proofreaders, book designers, teachers, researchers, and rewriters, and many other professions related to the English word. In addition to Japan, SWET members work in many countries around the world. We host numerous events each month, both online and in person, such as our talk shops, Translator Tuesdays, and writer salons. If there are any events you'd like to see happen or translation topics you'd like to know more about, we'd love to have your ideas and initiative. In 2025, SWET celebrates 45 years as an essential organization for writing and translation in Japan. And if you're not yet a member, please do join us. Membership dues are 6,000 yen a year. Please see our website, swet.jp, for details on how to join. And at the top, I'd like to thank Lynn and Richard of SWET for their support and patience as we've put these talks together, as well as Lisa Wilcutt for helping set up the Zoom. Next, I'd like to introduce the goal of this series of talks. Earlier this year, we had a heated discussion on the SWET email list about AI in translation. This was complicated by two factors. First, it was an email exchange, which allows for the quick exchange of ideas, but can miss nuance at times. We felt like a live event would be more appropriate given the level of interest in the topic. Second, when it comes to AI, there are a multitude of different conversations all happening at once. Should we use AI? To what degree should or can AI be incorporated into translation? How do you actually use AI services? What are the dangers and risks that AI presents that we may not be taking into account? In order to have more productive conversations, we felt like it would be best to divide the topic into multiple sessions to really focus on a single issue at a time. So like to ask everyone to keep any questions today focused on the topic we're addressing. I've also asked our speakers to focus their ideas by condensing their thoughts into no more than 5 slides. Today, we will be discussing how translators and translation companies can incorporate AI into their work. We have two speakers. They are Alex Queen and Richard Sadowsky. Richard will be speaking first today. Richard has been a freelance translator since Heisei Gannen, that's 1989. He is based on Awaji Island and is an integral part of SWET and JET, helping organize past IJETs in Kyoto, Kobe, and Hawaii, and serving as a mentor for JET's Ijuku program since 2011. Richard has presented a number of times at IJETs and JET projects on productivity tools and the use of AI in translation, including at the 2023 IJET on how translators can use AI tools now and what's in store. And Alex is the founder and CEO of Queen & Company, a digital communications agency bridging language, technology, and culture across Japan and the UK. He leads ventures in multilingual services, digital technology, hospitality, and community spaces, including Honyaku OS, a language services platform, and 1454, a culinary hub and community space in Aomori Prefecture. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today, Alex and Richard.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and get started with Richard's presentation. So I'll take myself and Alex off spotlight, and we look forward to hearing from Richard.
Okay, so SWET Talk Shop series, as Daniel just introduced, is just getting going and open-ended. So we'll see where it goes from here. According to the 5 slides, here's the first one. So setting aside the general concerns, these are my own. A superintelligence might get loose and destroy humanity. So they call that AGI, or the singularity. AI will keep gobbling electricity. AI was built on copyright infringement. Malicious players will use AI to do evil. These are all the things we have to set aside first. AI will be employed to bring profits to the few, not to the many. And the last part I would like to read out loud and the URL is afterwards. Agentic AI is a set of AI technologies coming together to give you a team of super smart agents, quote unquote, that are ready to handle whatever complex tasks you may have at hand. These agents can think, make decisions, learn from mistakes, and work together to solve tough problems, just like a team of human experts. Similar to generative chat AI, agentic AI is built with large language models, LLMs, at their core. But while generative chat creates content, agentic AI uses LLMs to understand context, make decisions, and take real-world agentic action. This is just to set up the second part, which is the risks. And this comes from Berkeley. Afterwards, you can Google it yourself. Next big thing, Berkeley, and you'll get the whole paper. This is, again, setting aside the general concerns. This is what my own 5 things were just off the cuff, and these are what actual people in the industry, scientists, say. Agentic AI risks can manifest in fundamental ways. One major concern is the misalignment with human values, where AI goals may conflict with human interests, resulting in harmful outcomes. Another risk is the potential loss of control, as agentic AI systems could act unpredictably or take irreversible actions. There's also the possibility of malicious use, with agentic AI being weaponized for cyber attacks, disinformation, and other illegal activities. Economic and social disruptions are another issue, as automation leads to job displacement, increased inequality, and a concentration of power in the hands of a few. Safety risks also arise, as agentic AI malfunctions in critical systems could trigger cascading failures. In the worst case, superintelligent AI could prioritize its own goals over human survival, posing an existential risk. Ethical and legal challenges, such as accountability, privacy concerns, and bias, must also be addressed. Lastly, the environmental impact of agentic AI is a concern due to its high resource consumption and potential harm to ecosystems. Yes, set those aside. Very minor things. And we just have to use what we have now. So the AI platforms I mainly use, just to go straight into it, are, for example, like everybody, Google searches. And have you noticed that now there's not only an AI overview right at the top of your search, but in the menu bar itself, it's called AI mode. If you want to check that out, you click on it. I also use an extension called Gemini next to Google results, and that shows on the sidebar even more general information, sometimes a translation, and I find it very useful. Then in terms of translation, I use DeepL Translator, which is also AI. DeepL can be used for free or the paid version. Same with ChatGPT. It's just a matter of, with ChatGPT, how much you can use it until it says an earlier model, or like instead of ChatGPT 5, it'll downgrade to 4 until 5 hours later or something like that. But you have no limits like that in the paid version. And then Grammarly. And I'm not sure if everybody has heard of Grammarly, but it does things like within the word processor, it'll find your 2 spaces, an extra space, or if you change subject, verb, singular, plural, it'll highlight that. It just also gives you suggestions on what kinds of grammatical adjustments even that you can make. And I use all of these on a regular basis. Now, the specific concerns, we address the general ones. The specific ones that I find with ChatGPT are these. Errors are hard to detect because they are often good. The results are often good and presented confidently. If, for example, you ask it to translate from Japanese into English and you give it a prompt such as professional tone for an integrated report, for example, or if you're doing a narration, you want it to be, you say it's going to be for narration and it should be brief or it can be promotional, give it a positive tone, and it generally gives you very good results. But that's a problem because sometimes there are errors, so you can't trust it completely. So AI gives you plausible linguistic output, but it can't read between the lines. So again, this is what the human translator has to do is often if there's no subject, it could get it wrong or just the nuances are not right. And we have to do all the background work on putting together the translation using the the output we get just as a draft or a basis. It tends to skip elements in the Japanese. It if based on the prompt that you want it to sound good or sound natural, flowing in English, it might drop a couple of elements in Japanese, and you have to decide whether that is simply a case of redundancy that it can be done away with, or do you actually want to use two terms, but you have to be aware that it will skip those things. And it doesn't always reflect earlier requests. What I mean is that when you have an entire thread, say for working on one job or one client's job, then you say, yeah, please. I can't think of a really good example now, but use the references. One thing that you can do with ChatGPT is upload, say, for example, a previous year's integrated report, both in Japanese and English, and say use these as a reference. And then as you keep going and trying to refine certain details of your translation, it seems to forget what you've asked it to do before. This might be improved over time, but sometimes it's really better to double check and then you find it tells you very confidently that this is what the reference material uses, or then you have to say actually go to the website and see if it's on the website, and it will look things over, but it will be very confident in giving you the wrong answer that's not actually used when it says it is. That's part of it, also part of why you need to be careful. And lastly, it lulls you with sycophantic replies. So if you say you're wrong, it's obviously said this, they say, oh, yes, you're right. There are other circumstances like that where you just can't trust it. So the next slide is my best practices. I mentioned a couple of these as I'm talking, but use it judiciously, but don't trust it fully. And just personally, I try not to be polite with it and just ignore it. If it offers, shall I do this? Shall I integrate this into the previous reflect from the output I gave you earlier? Just keep going. Don't have to be nice about it. Just saying please doesn't improve anything. And personally, I feel like I don't want to get into a kind of anthropomorphism, as that is, making it seem like it's human. The fourth item on my own best practices are the end client can also use it, so don't just copy and paste wholesale. And this holds for Google Translate, DeepL, ChatGPT, these things are free at the beginning, just a certain amount. So if you do just copy wholesale back and forth, that won't be good. And the last one is don't be over reliant on it. Do thorough checking for terminology, consistency, etc. All kinds of things. You have to be extremely careful going back and forth. Next slide is, oh, this is my last slide. Questions, and I was going to do a quick live demo, but I'm not sure now. These are the questions that Daniel has asked me, and let me just quickly go through them. Has the use of these tools helped improve your translation quality and speed? Actually, that was one I asked myself. The answer for quality is definitely yes. The answer for speed is sometimes yes, but a lot of times no. And the reason for that is because you can ask it so many detailed questions, I wind up trying to refine. And at some point, I just have to say, let me just stop there. And maybe after all, I should have just translated on my own from the beginning because I'm going around in circles. It could be either going into rabbit holes or just trying to ask it too much. So the speed, sometimes, but a lot of times it's not any faster. However, it's better quality because there's more input of all sorts to choose from. So how has your use changed in the last 2 years? Yeah, I use these tools a lot more than before. The process used to be go to a dictionary to look up a couple of words and or go to a thesaurus sometimes, but now I have a whole base. Generally, what I'll do is get as the base the DeepL, Japanese to English, and then set that aside or look at it with the Japanese. And then I sometimes work with ChatGPT as the base of the English. Before I used to have extra columns in a table where I would put ChatGPT in one and DeepL in another, but it turned out to be too much. It was like those, it's almost too good. How am I going to differentiate? It would just take too much time. So I just work with one that's better than ever. DeepL didn't used to be so good. I used to call it machine translation, but it's also AI. It's really good. But you'll see where the sentence structure is different, front and back between them, and some things are exactly the same. I'm going, how could they both be exactly the same? Something's going on here. So I'm doing a lot of editing of translations. And a lot more of making really sure that everything is consistent terminology wise and everything. How do you keep your data confidential? Here is you have to opt out for each thing. Under ChatGPT, it's data controls. Don't improve the model or improve the model for everyone and then toggle that off. And you have to do that for each service. You have to tell them, yeah, I don't want the answers or anything that I share to help you improve your model. That was discussed at a Translator Tuesdays SWET talk, first of the month, this month. Do I have client restrictions like telling me I can't use AI or I must use AI? I've come to the conclusion that if at least this doesn't apply to Queen, to Alex's company at all. This is a different set of scenarios here, but generally I'm trying to say, is it okay if I use AI? I ask one, and they don't really have an answer. I say, as long as I'm not sharing any sensitive data. Next time I've said, what software do you use? I use AI and I use ChatGPT and DeepL, for example. There are others, Claude and Perplexity. I'll come to that in the last one. But I just, at this point anyway, felt that if they're hiring me as a translator and I have the ultimate responsibility as the one who's providing them with the service and the ultimate output. I'm going to turn this off. Then whatever tools I use, it's going to be, I feel it's okay to say, this is what I use these tools and it's part of my workflow. And that's the way it is. And where do I think the technology is headed next? Perplexity just announced that they have a new browser called Comet. And it seems like that browser wars, there used to be, remember, big browser wars? Now the AIs are going to be built into competing browsers. Where that will go, I don't know. But that's it for my presentation.
Thanks so much, Richard. So I guess I'll ask you just a couple of questions before we move on to Alex. I'll take Lynn's from the chat. So when you're working with DeepL, she asks, do you make its draft, you edit right in DeepL and make its draft better before copying to your own file, or are you just using it as a reference while you're working?
I will copy the Japanese into DeepL and copy the English out of DeepL and put it into my word processor. It's a
Got it.
whole lot easier to do with DeepL even if you're using a table format than it is for ChatGPT. So I generally just put the whole thing in, and then when I work with ChatGPT, I go section by section
Great.
and adjust
And
as I go along.
got it. And you mentioned that you uploaded files as reference to ChatGPT, and I assume that though it sounded like they're integrated reports, so those are publicly available data and things like
Yeah,
that. Okay, got
yeah.
it. Do you know if that's something that you'd be able to do and limit the service's access to those materials, or is that something where you'd want to be careful, a translator would want to be very careful about what they're uploading, I assume?
Yeah, it's probably best to look at closely at their terms of service, privacy, and everything. I think in the future they're going to make it easier to be able to use AIs while completely being able to keep your data safe from outside eyes.
And can you remember any kind of error in particular that you'd be able to share with us that stands out as something that is maybe like emblematic of some of the challenges with ChatGPT or some of the benefits of ChatGPT?
I almost had it ready for you. The last 15 minutes I had a migraine aura. Let's come back
No.
to that if you don't mind.
Okay, got it. Sure, no trouble at all. Let's go
Okay.
ahead and move to Alex now. I'll go ahead and spotlight Alex, and I'll remove myself and Richard and take it away, Alex.
Excellent. So first off, I'll just start off with who am I and why should you care? I don't think I can make you care, but I'll just give you a brief introduction to who I am. My name is Alex. I'm American by birth. I grew up between the US and Aomori. From the age of 13 onwards, I lived with a family in Aomori who owned a juku, private juku, and so spent a lot of my time in Aomori, where I currently own and operate a community center called 1454, as Daniel introduced. Over the past 9 years, I've built out a company called Queen and Co. And our flagship product or service is Honyaku Cloud, rebranded about 2 years ago as Honyaku OS. And what we're trying to do here with Honyaku OS is bring a set of systems or processes to our translation process that allows us to provide consistency and quality to our end clients in ways that don't compromise our credibility or our ethics or morals. So we're trying to build these systems for clients in ways that they're scalable. And one of the biggest questions, I think, for us is even beyond AI, but in general, is how do you bring consistency when everyone's process, i.e., their systems, are just so different? And I think that's one question that has been on my mind, especially the past couple of years. And so that's why today there will be talk of AI, but I think I want to go a little bit broader than that and talk about systems in general and translation as a system. I had a different title a couple of days ago when I sent this over to Daniel, but I had to rethink about it. But that sounds it was something about translation in the age of AI, and it sounded very grandiose. And I thought, wait, this is a bit much. Let me go back down to being a bit more practical about this. I want to talk about designing better processes with technology, of which AI is one. And we see it at our company as just one tool in the tool belt rather than the end all be all. And I think everyone here, as writers, as translators, we realize that translation isn't just about words, it's about how meaning moves through these words to affect change in people. And we use different processes to do that. And if anybody here has used a CAT tool, you're already using technology in your process and you're reaping the benefits of that, term bases, translation memories, etc. So we all work within these systems, whether we are cognizant of that or not. And I think system design, which is what I'll be talking a little bit about today, can help us see how meaning flows and where it might break down and what we can do to build better processes. So today's agenda, I'll just run through this very quickly. I think I want to talk about little bit about what is systems design and how has that had a profound impact on the way that I view our work. Then I want to apply that to translation. And then I'll explain a little bit how we work at Honyak OS and also where we're headed in the next 6 to 8 months, some of the tools that we're building. And then also I'll end on designing systems of meaning, or how I see this and why I think it matters that we build these systems based on design systems thinking, or systems design thinking. So what is it? Why systems design? What is the systems design approach or the thinking? It's actually a model from engineering. There are two books that I always have my coworkers read whenever we work together. One is, I've got it in front of me. One is Rhetorical Grammar. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this book by Martha Colm. I first read it in graduate school, and it's like my Bible. It's dog-eared all over the place. But this gives you a framework for thinking about language and the different rhetorical structures that we use when we translate or write or post-edit, copy-edit. And there's another book that has really influenced my thinking called Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. And ironically, I don't have it with me. I think one of my colleagues actually has it at the moment. But this is an example of, I think it's the first example in the book that is given as a system. So the simple example here is about population dynamics. Every system has inflows, stocks, and outflows. So if we think of population, we have births on one side and deaths on the other. I know this is a bit macabre for a Saturday evening, but it's just a very simple example of a system. If we think of population as a kind of bathtub, for example, the more births you have, the more water in the bathtub. The more deaths you have, the less water in the bathtub. And so we can break these into two different types of feedback loops. Births, the more births with the stopper in the end, so less deaths, you'll have a reinforcing feedback loop, which creates more water in the tub. More people, more water in the tub. If you unplug that, unplug the drain and turn off the tap, and you have more deaths and hardly any births, so let's say a lot of Western Europe, the US, and Japan, you will have a balancing feedback loop, which drains the water in the tub. And so we can think of our own systems in these types of dynamics as well. We can think of it as a bathtub or plumbing, for example. So I'll just get into that as well. How does this apply to translation? Why would I even mention this in the first place? So this is the same exact diagram. Obviously, it's oversimplified, but we can think of it in the same inflows, stock, and outflows. How I see it, we'll start with the middle one, the data sets here as the stock. So I'm just a show of hands, if I could, how many people here use translation memories or glossaries when they translate, or term bases, or cat tools? So this is what I think of when I think of a data sets or the stock. So you're building off of a body of already approved, already vetted information, the golden standard, the Bible of whoever your client may be, or the industry may be as well. So for example, there are huge corpuses of data that the Japanese government has released, I think by the Tokyo Stock Exchange, called Edinet. So there's this giant body of glossary terms that you can now use free of charge, download and use in your cat tools. So that is one of the data sets, for example, that is going into our stock. It's not an inflow, it's not an outflow, it's there. But every time we translate and we save a term to a glossary, or we save a segment to a translation memory, those go into a data set. And so we can use these data sets to influence an AI output. Richard mentioned being able to upload integrated reports as references. You can do that in ChatGPT quite easily. You can also get a little bit more technical and build out multi-agentic workflows. He also mentioned AI agents. And we do use some AI agents in the workflows that we build as well, in the systems that we're building, but that's only one piece. So for example, if I explain this system in terms of systems design thinking, you will have data sets, and we have workflows that use deterministic operations that don't use AI at all to pull out specific terms in a passage of text, and specific translation memory entries that have already been vetted and approved by an end client. And then based on those, we have agentic AI, we have generative AI, operate on them. So it'll say, definitely use these terms. These are the pairs and you have to use them. And then once it creates a draft using those terms, we have another agent automatically operate and say, now we have a brand overview, a style guide, a verbal identity for this client. Operate on the draft using the style guide for this client. For example, we've worked with a big multinational food company that's very quirky and has a very fun tone. We also work with a very formal, rigid national university that does not want to be quirky or seen as fun or interesting in any way. They want to be seen as interesting, obviously, but they want to be seen as formal. And so you'll have different brand overviews, verbal identity data sets that we curate for that client. It'll run it through that, and it'll run it through another refinement agent, and then finally go back and say, are you sure you're using the right terms? And then we'll get that generated output in the form of a draft or suggestion. That suggestion will also have metadata surrounding it. So the metadata might be, why did it make these refinements? Which terms did it choose to use over other terms? And so we save all of this as discrete components in this tool Shunyaku that we're building. It's not perfect, as I'm sure Richard and Ashlyn, who have tried it out, will agree, but we're building this, and over the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to roll this out to our clients and to our translators to use as well. But the goal here is not to replace translators. The goal here is to generate an output that gives you a good baseline for you to do what humans do best: think critically, become the curators of information, the arbiters of information. So you look at that generated output and it'll be pretty darn good, if I say so myself. But you have to go and do your due diligence. You have to do some of the research. So your role becomes more of an information curator, more of a data steward. And then once you confirm that, it goes on to a peer reviewer, will give you further feedback, and it'll go back to you for a final confirmation. And then once you do the final confirmation, it goes on to the client. The client will either approve or have suggestions for that as well. And then once everybody's happy, we save that as the final object inside of the translation memory with any terms that we've extracted or registered in that process. And that goes into this stock, this data set. So you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see the human curated input here is the basis for everything, goes into these data sets. And then we, using these agents, we use techniques called RAG, CAG, MCP. These are the balancing feedback loops, the ones that make sure that the hair doesn't clog the drain, or that the bathtub doesn't overflow, or the pipes don't burst. These are these balancing feedback loops that we have in place to give us a pretty good generated output, AI generated output. But that is not fed back into the system without human oversight. And this is what's called human in the loop model, or what we like to say, AI in the loop model, because human in the loop model makes it seem like AI is doing all of the work and the humans just are doing that last 5%. We see it as the opposite of that. It's AI in the loop with the humans still in charge, in control of what is registered and saved as canon. And so once we have this baseline, translators will do the work, they'll approve it, the client will approve it, that becomes an inflow and goes back into the stock. And you can see how this builds on each other in an iterative process. And this is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to increase the quality and speed of our work by leveraging existing data sets and tools in our tool belt, one of which is deterministic data, glossaries, translation memories, and also generative AI, which might be a ChatGPT, might be Cloud, might be Mistral. We have lots of different options depending on what the client needs. If they want something that's open source or hosted locally, we can do that. If they want something, if they don't mind it being something that is hosted by a third party like OpenAI's APIs, then we'll use those instead. But what this does is it does increase our quality and speed. I think Richard mentioned it might not increase his speed because you can go down rabbit holes, and we find ourselves doing that, but it does usually increase the quality because the baseline is just so much better than working from scratch. It also gives us better data assurance as well, because it is using the terms from the glossary, and we can prove 99% of the time with these agentic tools that we're building, it will use the correct terms that are in the glossaries because we've built in the controls that allow us to do. And so you can prevent a lot of the hallucinations that people do find with using single agent operations if you do build out multi-agentic operations. So this is all nice and good and technical, but let me just break it down into our processes, how we work at Honyaku OS. We try to integrate humans, AI, and technology, and process into one system. And this is the part that I think is often overlooked, in my opinion, is the process and controls. People underestimate the value of process as a glue that binds everything together, and the order of operations in which we conduct these processes and use these technologies becomes very important in order to reduce the cognitive load of the translator and the linguist. And we try to break down tasks into their discrete components. Extracting terms is one job. Making sure the draft is accurate is another job. Making sure that it sounds good and is appropriate stylistically in terms of register, tone, diction, that's another job. And if you try to do that all at once, it can be overwhelming and you get a mediocre product oftentimes. So what we're trying to do is use that human input, creative expression, the intuition that we all have as native speakers of a language, the critical thought where we can connect different dots or realize that something seems really off here. And also the empathy that comes with human communication as a fundamentally human act. We want to leverage that to the maximum potential possible. And I think that's the fundamental difference in our value proposition then that is very different from a lot of companies out there that are trying to race toward either end. Only boutique translations that don't use AI whatsoever, or everything needs to be automated. And I think we have to find a happy medium where we say AI is really good at looking at glossaries and finding fuzzy matches and then giving you insights into how to leverage those fuzzy matches in your process. So why don't we let it do that so that we don't have to spend hours looking through an Excel spreadsheet, Control F, let's find this term. Let's let the AI do that so we can focus on higher order, higher value add processes. And so what we're trying to do at Honyaku OS is break those down into discrete tasks and then apply digital technologies to aid the human in getting those jobs done more efficiently. And hopefully, at the end of this 6 to 8 month sprint that we're in right now, make it an enjoyable process too. Not necessarily gamifying it, but making the interface an enjoyable one rather than your traditional conventional cat tool that everybody's used to working in now. And so that's the mission that we're on right now. And I can share these slides later on. I won't go into each single one, but we talked about the feedback loops in that bathtub analogy. I think that Richard mentioned in passing prompt engineering or using prompts and materials as well. But the goal is to leverage human communication and digital technologies through processes that glue them all together. If you do this well, then we can design systems of meaning. And so these processes that we build in, and these order of operations that we build in, become the infrastructure for our clients. We usually, how we work with our clients is not through agencies. We work with our clients in annual contracts and not on one-off jobs, but we try to bring added value rather than a per character basis in order to have a larger footprint in terms of what they do with their multilingual strategy. And I think one of the things that's so important is to build relationships of trust, which is also something that's not replicable by digital technologies. And then based on that trust, build out infrastructure, which is data driven. And if you can build out this infrastructure, then you can build assets, real actionable insights through glossaries that have lots of metadata, through translation memories that also have metadata. And what do I mean by metadata? There's all sorts of metadata, but one of the most important ones that often gets siloed are the conversations that the lead linguist and the peer reviewer will have with each other about a certain segment. And so you'll have, what we're doing now is we're saving the initial draft AI output, we're saving the lead translator's first draft, the peer reviewer's draft, and then the final translation that gets approved. And all the conversations around that, the timestamps, et cetera, as well as metadata. And what you can do with that is then create an intelligence or an application layer saying, okay, how did it go from this to this? What were the conversations had around that? And what are the insights that we can glean from that as well? And then if we can do that effectively, then that turns into a more strategic advisory layer that goes beyond just translation, but also may influence how our clients think about their source material. Oftentimes you hear a translation can only be as good as the source material you're given. I do think there is an element of truth to that. And so it helps our clients actually think about the source material that they're giving us when we are able to give them more actionable insights based on the translations that are produced. And I'll just end with this slide. The data is the new oil. And I think we have all heard this statement before. But the thing about this is that data is the new oil. That's the key word, oil. Oil is useless if unrefined. And so what we're trying to do is bring systems and processes that help us refine this data into clean, structured data that can be used for actionable insights. If you don't, then like the bathtub analogy, hair clogs the drain, pipes burst, pressure builds up in the pipes, etc., and you get garbage in, garbage out. And so it's really a balancing act of the reinforcing feedback loops that we create and the balancing feedback loops that we create for an iterative process where you're constantly building with every job that you do for compound interest effects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. That was super interesting. A couple of questions that I'm curious about. As you develop this system, it does sound like it's something you're running more locally rather than a paid service like ChatGPT. And I feel like that's something that maybe not everyone is aware of, that a large language model can be run like on a local server. I was wondering if you is it could you introduce that idea? Because for me, it seems like ChatGPT would be something that's just so enormous that it wouldn't even fit on a server, but something still useful could. And could you give us an idea of what it might take to set that up and how complicated it would be and what kind of expertise would be necessary to do something like that and what you might be able to do with it, a locally run large language model?
Sure. I do want to preface this by saying we do also create custom GPTs for clients that allow us to. We're very upfront with our clients, say we do use OpenAI's APIs, for example. We also use other large language models, LLMs, as well, and we're trying out different ones locally to see if they can replace some of our dependency on OpenAI, which is not great, and that creates risk. And so we're trying to offload that and mitigate that by trying different large language models. But yes, you can download open source models onto your machine. They have to be smaller large language models because of just the computing power that they require if you want to run them locally. There are other options that you can host them not locally, but you can find providers that will host them on a private server. And so you don't have to worry about that compute power. There's something called Anything LLM that you can use, which does that and it creates a virtual environment for you. So you can use something like that. It is fairly technical. I myself am not an engineer. I am a translator, but I have done a lot with digital technologies the past decade. And so I am working with our engineers to build these systems and these processes. But you can also leverage low code, no code solutions as well. I can't get into all of them. They're popping up daily. But some of the things that we use, for example, are there's a service called Langflow. There's a service called N8N, which helps you build agentic operations in a WYSIWYG, what is what you get editor as well. And so you can use those types of tools. You do need some knowledge as to how these systems work, first principles. For example, you need to understand that if you're uploading a document, for example, it may need to be chunked into multiple chunks because the context windows of these LLMs all differ based on which model you're using. And then after you chunk them, you have to create indexed embeddings of the data inside for tokenization. And so just understanding some of those first principles, I think, is a key component if you want to try to do something like this yourself. But it's by no means impossible. It's very beneficial to do, I think. And it'll be required of us as translators in the future to understand data. Like I mentioned in my talk, I see us more as information curators and data stewards rather than language converters anymore. But you can use, and we do provide our translators with custom GPTs as we're building out a more integrated system. And so I don't want to poo on that idea at all. I think if you can put in the right controls, then that's just as valid.
Great, that's super interesting. And when you say give the correct content, does that essentially be making their segments match up between languages? Is it something that simple or chunking the document in terms of?
So chunking the document will be, so let's say you have this is going to be very arbitrary, but you have a 10,000 character document. Maybe the context window for an LLM won't allow processing of the entire document all at once. And so you'll have to chunk that into discrete portions, let's say 1,000 characters at a time. So you'll end up with 10 chunks. So there's that part of it. But I think I gave you one example of our process, but there's actually dozens of processes that we have in place that all fit into a larger process. And we're trying to break those all into discrete components. For example, like the document ingestion, for example, if somebody sends us a PowerPoint or a doc or an Excel or a PDF, how do we ingest that in a way, in meaningful ways that are going to give us data in JSON or Markdown that's going to be actionable for a linguist and also structured. So I think that we could talk about lots of different processes or systems depending on which direction we want to take.
And then just one other question, similar to the question that I asked Richard, which is how are you seeing companies react when they come to you for translation, when you tell them we can incorporate AI into our systems? What is their initial reaction? How are they reacting to this idea of using their content with AI?
We haven't had any blowback, actually. A lot of people are excited when I contextualize it for them. Again, it's not we're just running your document through AI and we're going to send it back to you. We use AI as one of the tools, and it's a multi-agentic process that speeds up the translation. So over the past 4 years, we've halved the amount of time it takes to get through, let's say, an annual report for one of our clients. And because we meticulously manage the glossaries and the translation memories, it's also brought more consistency to the final product over time.
And then I think we're just about ready to open it up for everyone, but Lynn just put this into the chat, so I'll go ahead and ask you, what does working with these systems mean for the individual translator? What exactly are they doing differently than the traditional way of translating, where you've got two Word documents, one in the target language, one in the source language, and you're slowly building up the target document as you work through sentence by sentence?
That's really interesting because over the past couple of months, I've had really in-depth discussions with a lot of the translators that we work with, both in-house and externally. And when you say traditional in scare quotes, there is no traditional way of translating. Everyone has their own processes and their own systems, their ways, their quirky ways, idiosyncrasies of doing things. What we're trying to do is bring, this goes back to that original question that I mentioned, the first slide, is how do you bring consistency when everyone's processes, i.e. their systems, are different? And so what we're trying to do is put in the guardrails, at least in my company. I don't have the general answer, but what we're trying to do is put in guardrails that allow translators or linguists to reduce their cognitive load. So we're going to go through different steps. When a translator is assigned a project, first we're going to go through a term extraction step. We're going to give you all the existing terms in the glossary, and then here are a few that aren't in the glossary, but maybe we want to consider adding them. And we want to gamify that a little bit, not Tinder, swipe right, swipe left if you think, swipe if you think it should be a term, swipe left if you don't. And then that goes on to the peer reviewer, and the peer reviewer can escalate that to the client, for example, all in real time. And so we're trying to break these processes down into their discrete components to allow people to grapple with this in what we see as the correct order of operations. But as an individual translator, I think it's being aware that whatever you're doing is a system and might come from that realization. You can say, okay, I am doing something that is a system. There's an input, there's a stock, and there's an output. What are these tasks that I'm doing? And are they the correct order of operations, in my opinion? And then taking a critical look at your own processes and seeing how they fit together.
Great. And on that note, let me go ahead and bring Richard back up, spotlight him. And if anybody has questions, I will put myself on spotlight myself, and we can just take questions from anyone.
Yeah, I can also answer that question a bit. How it differs from traditional left and right to word processing files. You're working within a cat tool. I don't know if you'd call it a cat tool, Alex. And
Yeah.
it's section by section, sentence by sentence. And where there's 100% match, it tells you 100% match, and you don't have to do anything about it or just confirm. Personally, I would translate it in the traditional way with the left and right documents, or I have done in the past. My methods are changing. And then go ahead and upload it sentence by sentence into their online CAT tool. I don't like working in the framed system. Maybe I'll get used to it and change.
Can I just add on to that? Because I agree 100%. I think that it removes the context that's so important when you're working line by line, and how most all CAT tools currently process documents is, if you're working Japanese to English, is maru and line breaks. And they do have a preview, which is sometimes good, sometimes not so great, inside of CAT tools like Phrase or MemoQ. But again, you're so distanced from the context of that, and you're doing this context switching that it just feels inauthentic. And so one of the things that we want to do in the next 6 to 8 months is change how we chunk documents and make that semantic. So what we're trying to do is take like a doc or a PowerPoint and create semantic chunks out of that. So you do have header tags and paragraph tags and bullet list tags, numbered list tags, etc. when you convert a document into, say, Markdown. And so those become the chunks rather than just the sentences. Because one of the biggest things that I noticed with Japanese to English translation is a lack of cohesion in English when you have something that may be accurate, but it just sounds so stilted. And I think that is because we're all, not all of us, I'm sorry if I'm lumping you in together, but I can often get into something called cat brain, where I'm just thinking about the segment by segment, trying to get the content accurate rather than how it all flows or fits together.
I see Winnie's has a question. Do you want to unmute and ask? Or I can ask for you.
Sure. Hi, thank you for the interesting presentation. I was just curious, do you apply these to all types of document or manuscript, or are there some that you think it's more or less appropriate for?
Alex?
You want me to? Okay. We do different things for different types of files. So we don't apply it to every single one, but we do try to run it as a baseline, like the Shunyaku tool that we've built at least. We try to run that on almost every file that we do receive. But for example, we'll get videos that we have to subtitle. And that is a completely different process and a different system altogether in terms of how we work. And the Shunyaku isn't really as appropriate there, but it will help us get a baseline. For example, extracting all the terms in one go. It's quite good at doing stuff like that. We'll still use it, but in a different capacity, not as the baseline, but as in a complementary tool.
And for me, when I don't use any of those AI tools is when the text is quite abstract. It could be art related, often is. And it's a no starter even with the AI tools. That's all. Does that answer your question, Winnie?
Yeah, that's interesting to phrase it as abstract. Yeah, of course, there's a question of fiction, which I think you probably aren't talking about. You're talking more about business or how about academic? Some academic writing can be quite abstract. Or I'm just curious how it works with those different genres.
We do a lot of art translation. In fact, that was my specialty, was contemporary art, and worked with a lot of contemporary artists in Japan. And you're exactly right. Like, I think that with fiction, literary translations, and art translation, there's less repetitive content, which is what this works best with financial results or integrated reports, etc. We have built out different agents that help us get a good baseline for, say, art translation, but that's all they are. And there's so much copy editing that goes on after that. It is, in my opinion, it is still useful to get it as a general baseline, but it's never what you want. It's never what you need necessarily.
Can you maybe discuss the revision process a little bit? What I like the idea of building that term base, if you can extract that term base, building that up to have as a foundation as you enter the translation and revision. But what happens if a term is revised? Is your system is able to reflect that automatically and then have another set of eyes take a look at it for a review to make sure things are staying naturally
It's tough,
with the new term?
as Ashlyn can attest to as well. We have systems. We right now use Phrase as our main cat tool as we're building out an MVP of a next generation cat tool. What I don't even want to call it a cat tool, but we're building that out. So right now we will manage terms inside of Phrase, but we're using that API to get those terms into our own databases. And those are shared with the client, and they see any new terms in a kind of a pending holding pen. They can choose to revise or approve those. We also talk about it amongst the team internally. And so no translation escapes our grasp without at least two people, two sets of eyeballs on it. And we like to have those discussions and try to capture as much metadata around it. Like I mentioned, like conversations around why we think that's the right term. And then right now it depends on the client. Sometimes we'll share a Google Doc with them or a Google Sheet with them for them to go through, or we'll share an Excel doc, or they'll see the terms in the holding pen and we'll discuss those once a month when we have our regular meetings with that client and then approve them there. It depends on the urgency and the project, obviously. Oftentimes our enterprise clients will say, we need this done by this date. And so we'll just send them a list of terms and say, if you're okay with it, just let us know. And then we'll go ahead and approve those inside of the term base. And then we'll save these. Once they're approved in the term base, then they're used in the Shunyaku tool. Oh, excuse me. Yes, it's a computer assisted translation tool. Phrase computer assisted translation tool like Trados or MemoQ.
Yeah, I know that, but a lot of people don't work with that. And I don't think it's a good idea to just act as if everybody knows how it works and all the abbreviations and everything. It really makes your audience, narrows it down. And those of us who are stretching to see what's going on in these mechanized, technologicalized worlds, well, we just need it straight, regular language, and the awareness that there are a lot of translators who don't use those things. Thanks.
So How, I guess that's an interesting, maybe that leads me to an interesting question is this, we've had CAT tools, computer assisted translation tools for decades now. Some of the more famous ones, obviously Trados is pretty industry standard. How is the, how are these different from Trados in terms of just the user interface? Is that something that either Alex or Richard or even Ashley might be able to speak to?
I think that a lot of CAT tools are incorporating AI, machine translation engines. So no matter which one you use, you can hook up different types of machine translation to it. Google Translate, DeepL, other tools as well. So we, for example, inside of Phrase, do still use DeepL in terms of just another reference point. So they're hooking AI technologies up to their editors, but I don't think they're fundamentally rethinking the way in which we conduct translation. And essentially, what we'd like to do is move it back away from this computer-assisted translation tool, CAT tool model, where you're looking at almost like a spreadsheet with another pane over here that gives you terminology, and put these documents back into their native context using what I mentioned. Markdown is a language that shows what's a heading and what's a bulleted list and what's a paragraph. And we're trying to allow the linguist to see the content in its how it will be seen by the reader. But behind that facade are a bunch of unique IDs that link things together. So a paragraph will be linked to a file, which will be linked to a project, which will be linked to a client, for example, and all that's going on in the background, which you can't do inside of a Google Doc or a Microsoft document. And I think that's where you see the compounding results.
Or a Trados or a MemoQ, from what I understand, which is a lot more
Right.
like this segment spreadsheet type model that you just mentioned. Yeah.
Right.
And interesting. Okay. And Markdown, for those who aren't aware, is somewhat similar to HTML. Could you give us maybe a 5-second summary of what Markdown is?
Sure. Markdown is a language to render text content. So you'll have tags that are like H1, H2, H3 for header 1, header 2, header 3, or P for a paragraph. And it's a very simple language to give hierarchy to textual information.
Ashlyn, you wanted to
Yeah,
comment?
could I just say something real quick? It just came to my mind. I think, like, going back to maybe one of the last questions on Richard's last slide, like, where is this going? I haven't worked with CAT tools that long, and I've only ever worked really consistently with Phrase. But it seems that, like, the CAT tool and creating translation memories and term bases has been incredibly beneficial to the process of translation. But in order to do that, like, we had to first break it down into an Excel spreadsheet, like you said, which has its defects or its attendant disadvantages. And maybe the next place this is going is, again, like integrating, using the technology to have all of those, to utilize the data, but have it like integrated in a more kind of naturally flowing way. So it's like almost I would just really simply think of it as almost just like a mashup, or like a kind of integrated form of the like side-by-side Word docs and the Excel spreadsheet CAT tool translation. It's gaining all the advantages of having the words and the things that you don't need to waste your time on, because you should ultimately, I was also thinking, this comes down to you have to use your brain for certain tasks. Don't waste, I don't want to sit there and think about something that I can be sure is accurate and approved by the person, like the client whom I'm translating for. So just to have those elements integrated, but in a way that's not, that is more naturally flowing like a text, like you'd read it. So maybe that's a place it's going. But I also want to say too, quickly to Lynn's point, like I feel you, and I like, even having worked with Alex and learned a lot, like I don't know what all the words, those acronyms were. So it's okay. I think sometimes it can be intimidating, especially when it comes to technology, because of all of the, I don't know. Every kind of like all of the more like existential dread. Literally, we just talked about this in Richard's first slide that kind of surrounds these topics. But yeah, it can be intimidating. But maybe, obviously not everyone is, again, back to, and also what I said at the very beginning, not everyone is, we're not on the same page, but it's also okay. And yeah, I don't know. It shouldn't be like, it doesn't have to be intimidating if we don't all understand all the acronyms, because I certainly don't, but we're getting there. Yeah.
I'm not intimidated. I am.
No.
It just is irrelevant to me.
I'm not saying that our way is the right way. I think I'm proposing just a different way of thinking about doing mostly business. This applies to a business context rather than a literary, or for example, in the arts as well. A different way of doing it that is maybe an update from now the maybe 30-year-old way of doing things in cat tools. It's an update to that.
Just a quick aside, just to say that all the issues that Ashlyn mentioned in Richard's first slide we'll be addressing on November 9th at our third talk, which are the risks of AI. So we'll get into those very deep then. And so back to Richard. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, as a freelancer, I really appreciate that I don't have to produce an output that has the headers and H1, H2. I just plain text it, and then the company, the agency has to take care of that. If you're going to be producing as a company from the beginning to the end, then I imagine it could be useful that it's built into the process as soon as the translator submits it.
I think perhaps I was a bit technical with the acronyms, but what we ask our translators to do is not any of that. They don't have to understand any of that. And the whole point is to allow the translator focus on what they do best, and that's translate and craft, be wordsmiths and craft good content. And that's what we're aiming to do, is make this as frictionless as possible so that you don't even know what's happening. You click a button and you get all the terms that we've already processed and made available for you to reference in your work, and try to eliminate, like what Ashlyn's saying, like, why do I have to download this file, prep it for the cat tool before I can even get started on working in this document? And we're trying to eliminate that all from the process, all the faff, if you will.
Marty has a question in the chat. Marty, I don't know if you want to unmute and ask it, or I can ask it for you. Okay, go ahead, Marty.
Hello. Yeah, no, it just occurred to me as a general, you have a lot of text maybe, or translation material covers a wide spectrum. And would you agree that the less repetition in general, the less useful these tools are? In the arts, literature, surely nobody would dream of putting poetry into a translation tool. I see this as a spectrum from, if you have poetry at one end and I don't know, an ingredients list at the other, or whatever it may be. So we're placing our work somewhere along this spectrum to see what the utility of the tools is. So that's my thought on it. And also, as a secondary to that, I find there's a lot of value working as a freelancer in my personal relationship with that client, because they want something different doing for every single job. And they also know quite a lot of English themselves at times. And they'll be going, this time, but I don't like that, or I would like you to phrase it differently. And that's going to just vary from case to case. And I don't think any machine model will be equipped to handle personal quirks of that kind. But I don't say that in a depreciating way. On the contrary, to actually meet people's needs on an individual basis. So maybe we're looking at like mass-produced clothing, which we all buy and wear, and then you have the tailored suit, and the tailored suit has to have the person in there, and you have to tailor it one by one. Is that a good analogy? I don't know.
I don't know if you want to take this one, Richard. I can say just a couple of words. I think AI is just another tool in the tool belt. To me, it's not going to be the end all be all. It never is for our clients. We always have at least a round or two of revisions, no matter the content. And so I think that nobody wants to read AI slop, because communication is a fundamentally human endeavor. They want to make sure that they're getting that messaging right. And so I don't think you can replace that. And I think that's where our added value will always be as translators. And I think you're right, though, like the less repetitive it is, and for example, poetry in the arts, nobody wants to see AI generated poetry except for its novelty value right now. And I think that you can't really replace that. And once you do, it just becomes hollow and a bit empty, in my opinion. So Again, AI is a tool in the tool belt, but it'll always be up to people.
Yeah, I'd like to address Winnie's comment in the comments, which is basically that having to look up the terms over and over, you internalize it and you become improves your Japanese ability. And just in terms of even for business translation where you're doing integrated reports, if you are just presented with, okay, this is the equivalent, and you don't do any research in advance, you're still going to be missing something. So if you go and try to check out what does this company do? How do these things work? How did they present it before? And all kinds of things like that. The more you do and internalize, the better rounded your translation will be, your understanding will be, and it'll be reflected in the translation. But Winnie's question, maybe Alex, you can answer in terms of what if you have beginning translators and if they rely heavily on the tools, maybe they're not learning as well.
I think there's research that shows that is happening, no matter the industry, that people who rely too heavily on AI are activating fewer parts of the brain and different parts of the brain. And companies aren't hiring junior people anymore. So there is a hollowing out across industries as well. So we're seeing that regardless of translation, just across industry, which is a huge problem that nobody has an answer for.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I came to translation from a more informal background. So maybe if you went through a program, master's program, and were already at that level of comfort and not building it up on the job, not starting from zero, but it just feels like maybe there's a little less opportunity to pull yourself up by your bootstraps through all of that huge masses of work that you're just grappling with and struggling with until it becomes easier and easier. So yeah, I just have questions about the future of, yeah, I think it's going to change a lot for the whole industry, even if it is a great and convenient tool.
May I ask one more specific question? Is that okay?
Sure, yeah, please.
Yes, this is specifically to either of you, maybe Richard, but I've only tried the free versions of DeepL, ChatGPT, Claude, etc. Do the paid versions give you better quality or just greater quantity of use?
They're different. Some, depending, will allow you to retain your interactive thread for only 5 days or 30 days, depending on if you're free or I think that's Claude. As I mentioned with ChatGPT, it drops you down, but even dropping down from 5 to 4 is not bad. Consider 4 to 3.5 or earlier. ChatGPT 5 I found is great because it will at a certain point it will tell you, it'll give you two answers and it says, which do you like better? And recently I would choose the one that gives you 3 versions and it explains what each version is. And it also, I've found that after it gives you the translation, it says the English was chosen for the clarity of expressing this Japanese, or this is a standard business term. So it explains the translation as well. And I didn't see that before in an earlier version of ChatGPT. I just think it's getting revving up in terms of usability.
Yeah, and you
That
get
answers your
greater
question.
memory. Is that an advantage of paying? You have the memory that then you can build up that corpus for yourself to say, on these jobs, I want this terminology and this kind of thing that you don't get on the free versions, or?
For
Is that not
ChatGPT,
right?
it's you've reached your limit. You have to wait 5 hours until you can continue, but you can actually continue at a lower level of there.
Yeah, I was thinking of memory in a different sense. Can it remember jobs that you've done a long time before, or say, for example, I want British English in this, or I want this or that?
Does anyone know? Yeah, I have all of my old threads and I can just say, if I go back to a certain client, a certain project, it'll have that and I can even search within it.
I was wondering whether there are advantages in paying, whether you gain these features by paying or not.
Can
I
I
need
say
to
something?
pay and find out. Yes, please.
I think one important feature that you gain with paying is the ability to not allow your data to be used for training purposes. If you want,
At least
If you
yeah,
use the product for free, then you are the product. So they're going to be sucking up all of the data that you input into the LLM. So if you do, obviously this is you trusting OpenAI, which we can only trust them as far as we can throw them. But if you do pay, you can at least turn on that functionality where you will not share your data with them.
So the
Yeah.
option that Richard told us about earlier, so you toggle off this thing, don't improve the model for everyone, that is not available to free users. I see.
with DeepL, when you pay, it says now you have maximum security on your data or something like that. Alex?
Assuming you trust them, as you say.
Assuming.
That's it boils down to trust, doesn't it?
I think that's true for even Microsoft these days, I think is really getting everybody into OneDrive and things like that. So
it's scary. It was just a talk from Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, that AGI will be, everybody's thinking it'll come in 3 years, maybe 2, and nobody knows what's going to happen at that point. And it's a very scary thing. So what we're talking about today could be irrelevant in a matter of days or weeks or months.
But I don't know if it's been discussed in other talks, but there are various other ways of using the AI without sticking in your entire Japanese text, or any of it for that matter. One example is that I use AI as a thesaurus now, so I'd say, could you give me alternative ideas for this? And I can put in the English there if I want, and it gives me lots of ideas, and then I can select. That's just one example. It can be quite useful, and also for factual research. Again, you can't rely on it entirely, but it can be quicker than a Google search.
yeah, one example that I can think of in terms of the question that I asked Richard earlier about these errors that you can look out for is I was working on a personal project and there was a phrase like, just to generalize it, it was Tanaka Kibun. So then it was a surname and then kibun, the word kibun, so feeling or, and so I recognized each piece of these, but I had no idea what person it was referring to. I had a little bit more context given it was related to a sport, but I still didn't know. And so I put it, I started just with Tanaka Kibun and it made something up. And I'm like, I don't think that's right. So I gave it a little bit more. And then it was like, oh, okay, it's related to this sport. It's got to be this person. So I Googled, that person didn't exist. And I said, I think you're wrong. And they're like, oh, no, it's actually this person. And was able to get it on the third try, although this was indeed the free version. And before the third try, I was able to find it in Google because I had gotten a little bit closer with that second one. But I think that's a good example of something where it didn't have the full context. And even with more context initially, the second time around, it was still making something up that wasn't fully correct.
I'll just say like any kind of people or proper nouns, I really am I'm very skeptical of the results on GPT. I think it's amazing for a whole lot of stuff. Research. Martier said it's so great, even if you never even use it for a translation. It's an incredible tool just for research. But anytime it comes to someone's name, yeah, that's where I find it's very difficult to trust.
Does seem like something that will be solved with time,
I think so too. Yeah, but
potentially.
So in the comment, I'm putting the link to the article about agentic AI risks. And they also talk about long-term planning agents, especially LG, long-term LTPA, long-term planning agents, as the ones that you have to watch out for. It's a relatively short article. It's a good one to prepare Daniel for your November 9th talk.
Yes, maybe on that note, we can wrap it up. Thanks so much for
If you
everybody
want
for
to
joining. Yeah,
save the chat, you know how to do
okay.
that, right?
I do not.
So the three dots
Save
at
chat.
the top
Okay.
of the
Yeah.
chat,
Yeah.
top of the chat column.
Got it. Perfect. We have this saved. Thanks, Alex and Richard. Thanks so much for your time, taking time on your Saturday night, Saturday morning. in the UK. And thanks everybody else for taking time out of your day for the second talk. And our third one, as another reminder, will be same time on November 9th, 7 p.m. Japan time. We will be featuring Julia Stratman, who works at the Utrecht School and does work with ethics of algorithms and works with organizations in the Netherlands on responsible use of algorithms. So I think will be a really interesting opportunity for SWET to get some outside expertise on the AI topic that I think will give us another viewpoint as we move forward. And we're already thinking about other talks later next year and have a couple of people potentially lined up for that. So stay tuned. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.